Um, well, thank you for that great intro. Good to see everybody, Gwen. Again, Gwen, good to see you again. It looks like we lost Arthur for a minute, but I'm sure he'll be back on. And I know that most people really want to hear from the candidates, so I will try to keep it short. My name is Peter Robbins Brown. I run an organization called Louisiana Progress. We are a political advocacy organization working on policy at the state and local level. We do quite a bit of work around voting in elections. And in particular, I've got quite a bit of background, as you mentioned, Lane, in redistricting. On the Secretary of State's office, up until not that long ago, the Secretary of State's office was one that most people didn't pay that much attention to. It was largely, and still is actually largely, an administrative and bureaucratic office, right? The job is to administer elections. That's the main job. There are some other aspects to it, certainly. But administering elections is a very big job. There are a lot of people involved, not just the voters. Obviously, voters, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not hopefully millions of people in Louisiana. But you have all of the state and local election workers, you have clerks in various parishes, all of these moving parts. You have voting machines, you have hours, you have buildings. So there's just a lot of work that goes into being the Secretary of State and fairly and impartially and smoothly running elections. Like I said, for a long time, this was sort of a job that in many states still is a nonpartisan election. Here it is a partisan election and has been, I think, always, or at least for a very long time. Most people wouldn't have paid that much attention to it. It was sort of who seems like they're going to be, I can trust them to just sort of run the elections. Obviously, over the last 6-7 years, that profile has changed significantly. The Secretary of State position in every state basically has become very politicized. And that is for a lot of reasons, which I'm sure people on this call are aware of. We've had, quote unquote, election integrity questions, although, of course, that is a highly politicized topic right there. And it's going to continue to be so. I don't see this changing anytime soon. And so the Secretary of State has gone from, like I said, this sort of largely just administrative, bureaucratic position to one that is very political. And what we're seeing now is a lot of people who are election deniers, people who, argue that in particular, the 2020 presidential election was fixed or rigged or whatever. Running for office in states around the country, we have one or two people who take that approach who are running for Secretary of State in Louisiana this year. Neither of the two on this call today, thankfully. So I don't think we'll need to hold their feet to the fire about that particular issue. But that's what we're looking at now, right? It's become a situation where you have, and these folks, fortunately, most of the election deniers who are running for these, both whether it's statewide or more local election administration offices, have either lost their elections or been pushed out of office after taking office because of that approach. Because what people realize is that when you're running for office, you might make a lot of noise about this, but again, what it ultimately comes down to is, can you run a successful election? Can you make sure that the election sort of trains run on time, right? That everybody gets the material they need, that the machines are working. And then, of course, there is a security element. It's not that the questions around election integrity are completely unfounded. There's always an issue of potential foreign actors or hackers or other people who might want to undermine people's confidence in America's elections to potentially mess with those elections. And so the Secretary of State role has become a little bit more, let's say, security focused or security forward than it had been in the past. And that's not necessarily a bad thing on that front, right? I mean, I think one of the things that we found was that our election infrastructure all around the country, I mean, in Louisiana, our election machines are 20 plus years old, that the election infrastructure was underinvested in and crumbling all over the country. And I think part of that was that we hadn't maybe been as thoughtful about all sorts of aspects of election administration, but even, you know, up to and including the security aspect, right? So that has become more of an important role in the Secretary of State's job in the past decade or so. And again, that's why you have to be clear, right? When somebody's talking about election integrity, are they using that, or similar terms, right? Are they using that as a code word for saying, you know, I believe the 2020 election was rigged and stolen? Or are they saying, you know, we have to be very aware of people potentially mismanaging or hacking into or otherwise undermining people's faith in our election processes and in their vote? Because ultimately that is the bedrock of everything else, right? Is that people need to believe and have faith in that when they go and cast a vote, that vote is properly counted, that everybody else's vote is properly counted, and, you know, that the outcomes of elections are ones that we can trust and believe in. Because if that breaks down, and that's one of the scariest, most insidious aspects of this ongoing campaign to question the validity of, again, in particular, the 2020 presidential campaign, but other elections as well, is that it's not just oh, we got screwed over and we think that there were some bad people behind it. It's that it undermines democracy writ large. It undermines the country and everything else, because if people just stop believing that whoever won an election won and whoever lost lost, then anything else we try to do is, you can essentially write it off, right? That we're never going to be able to move on to the more let's call it meat and potatoes aspects of politics and policy if nobody believes that our elections are secure and that their vote was counted and everybody else's vote was counted. You're never going to, you know, there's always going to be some people who believe in conspiracies, but what has kind of happened now is that a rather large percentage of the population has come to believe in conspiracies. And that's where we start to get into some really serious, scary territory. I know that you also wanted me to touch on amendment number 1, and I do want to jump over to that, but I'd like to kind of pause to see if anybody had any questions or feedback on sort of the importance of the Secretary of State position and how that position has kind of evolved, particularly over the past, say, 10 to 20 years, before I jump to amendment 1. Yeah, Lane. Oh, you're on mute, Lane.
I read for the first time this morning that there is that it isn't just a question of, it isn't very straightforward, that if the issue of how electors and secretaries of state and whatnot can affect whether our election and any state's election is certified properly to, you know, we all know that was the crux in the 2020 election. Apparently, if just a few, if neither candidate is able to, and please, I'm asking this as a question, I understand that if neither candidate can get, undisputedly can get, I think it's 270, isn't that the magic number of electors? If neither one can get to that by, I believe it's January 6th, then the whole election process, and this is apparently defined in the Constitution, but I have never read, I read the Constitution almost every day, not the Constitution, yeah, the Constitution. I haven't come across this part of it before. Apparently, there's another process which can kick in which each of the states, not each of the representatives, but each of the states represented in the House get a vote, one vote each state, to decide on the president. And each of the people in the Senate, each of our senators, but not our senators, each state represented in the Senate gets one vote to decide the vice president. And I wanted to throw that to you because you may have come across this before. I've never heard this before. And I wanted to ask you, is this disinformation or is this true?
No, that is if it was, so you could theoretically have a tie, let's say at 269 to 269 electoral votes. And then it would be thrown and it would to Congress, but Congress would essentially express the will of various state governments. So I don't want to say that I'm 100% sure on every single detail, but the gist of it is that you know, it would go to the state government essentially to decide who to vote for president. And so if a majority of the states are Republican, led by Republicans, they could choose to, you know, support the Republican, or if a majority of the states were led by Democrats, they could choose to support it's never happened before.
No.
We obviously came the closest. Well, there's been some times when it's come kind of close. You got to remember, and this is like a lot of problems with our United States Constitution, is that it was, you know, it was written by wealthy, entirely white men 250 years ago. And they were representing, obviously, you know, 13 colonies and much smaller populations. And so for them, and it was an agrarian society, right? So for them, they were trying to come up with these rules and how you could decide things based on those conditions. I don't think any of them could have ever truly imagined what America would look like 250 years from then, with 330 million people and high-speed internet and, you know, jet planes and all of these things, right? AR-15s, all the different things that they just couldn't have imagined. And so the process they set up was this idea, oh, well, we have 13 colonies, maybe we'll add a couple here and there, but, you know, I don't think they ever imagined 50 states, right? And so their thoughts, I think, were along the lines of, this could happen because we're dealing with far fewer people, far fewer units, right, as states, you know, thinking of states as units. And this is, you know, a tie seems more likely. We could have this backup, and this would be possibly the way to best express the will of the people, of the voters as a whole. It, like a lot of aspects of the Constitution, because of that history and because of just, there's no way, even if they were you know, more brilliant than they were, or whatever, or, you know, more equitable and all of the things we maybe wish they were, that they could have foreseen the challenges that we would be facing. It's one of the things that they did clear up a little bit, and I apologize, I'm blanking on the name of the voting act that was passed about a year and a half ago, that they did try to clear up some of the potential confusion there, particularly around the vice president being able to, you know, not count the votes like they were urging Mike Pence to do. But there is still some confusion there. And frankly, I think the in a way, the best thing we might be able to do is just pray that we don't get to that point. Because if we did get to that point, even though there is a process laid out, I think that people's faith in the outcome of the election would be so shaken at a foundational level that I don't see how we would avoid some sort of, let's just say, mass, at the very least, protest, if not worse, if it came down to that.
So I guess why I'm raising that, not to raise the whole issue of electoral college and all that stuff, except to say it's really, really important to elect a Secretary of State who is going to faithfully represent the facts and the law and the Constitution, you know, in terms of what gets certified for Louisiana and how.
Absolutely.
I have a question.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I just want to finish one point on lanes, and then Cece, I'll come right to you. That it's also become much more incumbent upon the Secretary of State. Again, this used to be somebody that nobody thought about. Nobody, if you'd ask people who their Secretary of State was or what the office did, I think most people wouldn't have known. It's become much more incumbent upon the Secretary of State, not just to be that bureaucrat and that administrator, but to be a public figure who goes out and says, this is how we're running elections. These are fair, free, safe, secure elections, right? So it's become more the sort of public relations aspect of the job has become more pronounced as the job has become more politicized. And that's why it's also important that we have somebody who is as non-political as possible. And sorry, Cece, you had a question. I apologize.
No problem. Just today, MSNBC reported that Louisiana is one of the 17 states with a Secretary of State that is an election denier. Share with us your perspective on what an election denier or someone who believes the election was stolen, if that person gets into that position, what can happen? What can they actually do?
I mean, think about, somebody who wants to come in and take over and run something that they're sort of actively opposed to, that they have like active antipathy towards. What's the damage they could cause, not just undermining one election, but long term, right? I mean, purely even just by ignoring, upgrading systems and things like that, right? I mean, you wouldn't even necessarily need to go in and sort of take a hammer to things. You could just sort of spend all of your time, on the golf course, and by not working and not actively keeping systems upgraded and updated, that could destroy it. But then, yes, there's also the aspect of if somebody just wanted to come in and take a hammer to the machine because they believe that, they believe in some outlandish theories, the damage could be, again, if people don't believe their vote is counting, or other people's, that everybody's vote is counted properly, that undermines every aspect of our society.
And then they could jump in and maybe sign off on fake electors, right?
All sorts of things. I mean, the possibilities are somewhat endless in terms of the damage somebody could do if they are of that mind in this office.
Thank you.
And Lane, I know you wanted me to touch on Amendment 1, and I do have to get to a union meeting, so I do have to leave in 5 minutes. So I just want to touch on it briefly for everybody. And I know most people are here to hear from the candidates, and so I apologize for eating into that time, Arthur and Gwen. Amendment 1, you've got 4 amendments this October 15th on your ballot. Amendment 1 is probably gotten the most attention so far. It's an amendment that says something to the effect of, do you want to shut off the ability of foreign governments, foreign actors, or private citizens to fund elections. Which on its face, I think for most people sounds agreeable. And there is a sense when you look at it just purely in concept where it's maybe not necessarily the worst idea. However, this is really fruit of a poison tree. This has been an ongoing process. It goes back to during the pandemic. Mark Zuckerberg, largely, some other folks as well, set up funding for local election administration during the pandemic to buy like PPE and have social distancing and sort of be able to handle all of that. It sort of turned into a conspiracy theory again when we talk about election denying, that Mark Zuckerberg and the folks who were with him in funding that were trying to swing elections to Democrats. So it's become a bit of a right-wing, particularly farther right-wing cudgel. The legislature passed a bill 3 years in a row. Well, let's see, 2020, 2021, 2022, that would have done this, but the governor vetoed it, largely because of the way the bill was run, that it really was, they kind of were trying to say this isn't us following through on these conspiracy theories, but that was clearly what it was. This year in 2023, they got around the governor's veto by making it a constitutional amendment. So I think it's important for people to understand that background when they go to vote on this, because when they do go in and you just read the amendment and you don't know anything about it, I think it sounds like it makes sense. I don't want to, and if you do decide to vote for it, I don't think there's anything like, wrong or evil about that, right? I mean, it's not a terrible concept from that kind of maybe 30,000 foot view, but when you understand the background and that it has been this really kind of, it is kind of coming from election deniers, and that it is coming from that part of American politics, to me, that makes it an easy no. So I'm just going to express, my personal belief, having seen, and I was at a lot of the hearings on those bills over the years, even testified against the bill a couple of times. So I think it's important that we understand the background and that fruit of a poison tree aspect to it, because when you just go in and read the language, I think that it will make sense to quite a few people, but that doesn't mean that it's a good idea.
And I think with that, first of all, I want to mention, thank you, Peter. You pointed me to an article that is linked on the Louisiana Progress website. I'm putting that link into the chat right now. And with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Cece. And first of all, thank you. Thank you so much, Peter.
Always a pleasure.
I'm going to turn it over to Cece to help moderate us through our discussion with the candidates.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I have to leave early. Good luck, and I'm sure you'll enjoy. Arthur and Gwen are fantastic, and you'll get to see that right now. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Peter.
Oh, well, welcome, Gwen Collins-Greenup and Arthur A. Morrell to Justice and Beyond Forum. So glad that you guys have come to share your expertise and your candidacy and your platform. So what I have are questions that the Pillars of Justice and Beyond have given me to ask you guys. And we're going to start with Ms. Collins-Greenup. The first question, and I'm going to abbreviate this question. The Secretary of State's website is a hot mess. It is jacked up. I mean, you can't, if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. So how will you make it easier for voters to understand what is on their respective ballots?
Okay, so first of all, with the, I'm a small business owner, have been since I was 19 years old. So I have lots of experience with the Secretary of State's website on the commercials division, as well as the notary division and the voter outreach division, voting division. So one of the things I plan to do is to establish a focus group and prioritize updating that website to be more user-friendly. I also implement people with marketing skills to come in, and business owners as well as community organizations, just get people from different industries to come in and conduct a focus group on that website, what can make it more user-friendly. I won't just implement my own ideas, although I have plenty, but we need to make sure that people are able to not only access that information, but are aware that the information is there. A lot of people don't even know that the information is on the website. So I also plan to work with community organizations, beginning with schools, go into those schools, take voting machines as well as information to start training our kids and work our way on up to the community organizations and let people know what the Secretary of State's office does and the resources that are already there and make them more accessible.
Thank you. Mr. Morrell.
Yes. Hello, Cece.
Hi.
It's been a while.
Yes, it has.
The Secretary of State is so important. That position is so important. I've looked at what the Secretary of State has been doing, and I have someone I've been working with for years who's an expert with internet. And with him and others like to come in and see just what is going on from the behind the scene, not from the front, and make suggestions, make it more friendlier, make it more easier. I also plan to open 2 offices, one in Northwest Louisiana, one in Southeast Louisiana, because I think the Secretary's office got to be based in some kind of way in the community. Make it available in case someone has a problem, they can go to one of those offices. That's going to be the first thing. The second thing is, you know, I was in legislature for 23 years, clerk of court for 16 years. I would like to send a delegate where they're having business conventions, where those businesses could be housed or located in Louisiana. Tell them what's available here and what we can do to help them to bring their businesses to Louisiana. I don't know if anyone's doing that right now, but I think it's important to be present at some of these meetings, to let these people know that we are here, we're ready to help.
Thank you. Next question from Ms. Collins-Greenup. Louisiana has multiple elections every year, which require extensive resources. It's very expensive and can lead to voter fatigue. What are your thoughts on efforts to realign or consolidate Louisiana's election calendars? And I might say myself that it has been said that elections are often put in off-year elections and off times so that voters will not turn out. So what would you do to consolidate, Ms. Collins Greenup, the election calendar?
Sure. Well, as you are aware, a lot of our elections are results from special elections, and that's something that is totally unavoidable. One of the things that I plan to do as Secretary of State is be a people-facing Secretary of State, much like I am right now while I'm running, and disseminate that information. I would encourage the elections that are special elections to be put on the ballot of the nearest election rather than creating a separate special election session for that election, because that's really where we get the multiple elections. Without those, we wouldn't have as many during the year. So I would go back to that voter education and voter outreach piece. You know, I'm gonna focus the majority of my platform around that and voter protection. But that could be a form of voter suppression if it discourages candidates from running as well as people from voting. I plan to, expand voter access and information throughout our communities across the state.
Thank you. And Mr. Morrell, what are you going to do about all of those multiple elections?
Well, the special elections is a problem. However, those special elections that are held, the Secretary of State doesn't pay for it. The person or the community or the government, local government who asked that they have these special sessions, they pay for all that. They're given a bill and they pay the Secretary of State to have this special election. Years ago, when New Orleans was the hub of the majority of legislators, they passed laws that made it convenient for local politicians to be able to run not only in a governor's race, but also in a municipal race. Everywhere else in the state, all municipal elections are held at the same time as the gubernatorial election. Orleans Parish is the only one that's different. Now, this was a part of the legislature, but special elections, when they're called, doesn't cost the Secretary of State anything because he has to pay the bill. I know, because when they call one in Orleans, we get the amount from the Secretary of State, how much it costs, give it to the person, the city, the school board, whoever is asking for it, and they have to pay for it. But that's something you have to deal with the legislature. But I do think they need to be reduced. Maybe they should have special times. You can have these special elections where you can have more than one item on that issue to save them money, and also stop the habit of running back and forth, having people who go to the polls to vote for one little thing. But the legislature is mainly responsible for that.
Thank you very much. Next question. We've seen increased trends in early voting, but the majority of parishes only have one early voting site. Do you think there should be more in-person early voting opportunities, and how would you support parishes in making that happen? If so, Ms. Collins Greenup.
So many parishes have the same issue we have with our commissioners. Right now, we are experiencing a shortage on commissioners because they are either aging out or sitting there for 15 hours administering an election is becoming unbearable. And the pay, the commissioner pay. So we have to look at recruiting more commissioners, as well as ensuring that our register of voters are on board with expanding the early voting. That was one of the issues. So ensuring that we have the proper infrastructure to do that. I know in most parishes, I know here in Baton Rouge, we have 5 early voting locations, and in most other parishes, they have 2 and 1 across the entire parish. So that causes people to have to drive a long way to vote, especially if they're in a rural parish where, like, I used to live. One of the things I plan to do is work with those registers of voters to see if we can open up more early voting locations. It's going to take a cooperative effort. I have worked with different organizations as a court director. We put one of the first DMVs inside of a court in the state of Louisiana. But again, that took working with different agencies and different people to bring that to fruition. So we have to make sure we have the manpower in place, as well as the buy-in and support from our register of voters and clerks of court to get the job done. And I believe we can do that. We're just going to have to work together to get it done.
Thank you so much. Mr. Morrell?
Yes. I have to say, in Orleans Parish, we've never had a shortage of commissioners other than right after Katrina. We asked other clerks around the state if they can loan us some commissioners, because again, Orleans Parish had that election when no one else had it. So the Secretary of State agreed and paid for those commissioners to come to Orleans Parish. But we had a policy of recruiting, going to schools, putting newspaper ads to get commissioners to come in, tell them what it entails. And let me tell you, our commissioners are well-trained and have more early voting locations. I'm all for it. They're only there for 11 and a half hours, not 15 hours. The time has been reduced twice by the legislature, which I disagree. I think voting should take longer than just those small amount of times. That's kind of voter suppression because they're making the time limited for a person to vote. But our commissioners are so important. They're the ones who make an election successful. And after every election, when we have the first class, I compliment them. They did such a great job. And I tell them, every time they do a good job, they make me look good, but they're the ones who make an election successful.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Greenup, Ms. Collins Greenup. And piggybacking on that, do you support Sunday voting? Souls to the polls type voting?
I support all voting. As Secretary of State, one of my top priorities is combating voter suppression. And coming from a parish, I used to live in East Feliciana Parish. I'm in East Baton Rouge Parish now, but there were a lot of state workers that worked in prisons. And if you know the way they work rotations on and off, they're trying to get sleep on their days off. They work 12-hour shifts and sometimes longer. So voting is a challenge for them. But we want them to be able to vote, and having voting available during election time is going to be essential to ensuring that we protect every eligible Louisiana citizen's right to vote. And as a candidate who is willing to do that when I'm elected, I will again work with our register of voters as well as our clerks of court to ensure that we can do these expansions. It all starts with them. Without having the manpower and the people who are willing to do the work and reaching out to them and not being a dictator Secretary of State, but someone who is willing to work with people to get the job done, we are not going to be able to do that. But if we are willing to be a type of candidate and a Secretary of State that will reach out to people and who has experience working with people across all levels of organizations, we can work with the people there to get the job done. And we can also work with our legislators to ensure that we have the proper legislation in place to do those things as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Morrell, souls to the polls. Should we do it? Can you do it?
Well, the Secretary of State cannot do that. That's an act of the legislature. But I would encourage more voter opportunities. That's where you have a competition in the legislature where they would have to make a decision. I would impose them to try and make it available. I have no problem with having more time for people to vote. But when it comes to making places available, you have someone who work odd hours or long hours. We encourage them to vote early or by mail, so it wouldn't cause them to have any problem with their work. So as many ways as we can, I would like to have a person who have difficulties getting to the polls to vote, not having to go to the locations, but either by mail, or you can also text ballots in. So I would make it as easy as possible. I would encourage, this is something I would like to implement, to have a roaming notary who could go places where a person can't get to the polls and they can take ballots with them. They can be commissioned to do that and have them to have that person to cast their ballot and then bring them back to the registrar's office. That hasn't been done yet, but I'm gonna look into it because some people just can't get there. Or maybe they had an accident, didn't have time to get a mail-in ballot.
So while you're speaking, let me ask the next question, and then we'll go back to Ms. Collins Greenup. And that is, what problems with voting accessibility, since you brought it, have we had in Louisiana in the last few elections, and what efforts would you implement to address these, including ADA compliance at polling sites? So what problems have we had with accessibility, to your knowledge?
Well, clerk of court is responsible to make sure that every polling place is accessible. It's a state law, it's a federal law. And we have inspectors to go out before every election and verify that all those locations are accessible for the handicap. If one isn't, they have to bring it up to be approved, or that place would be closed down. And we've had a couple times where we've had to move polling location, but we'd have someone at that old polling location to let people coming in and vote say, look, this place cannot be used because it didn't meet the accessibility for the handicap. The new polling location is such and such a place. And we'd have someone stationed there from the time the polls open until the time the polls close. But accessibility to polling locations are important. We've done a great job in making sure that everything is accessible for any kind of handicapped person.
Okay, Ms. Collins Greenup, same question, plus I have a second question, follow-up question. So
Sure.
ADA compliance and accessibility problems.
Okay, I will start off with ADA compliance. First of all, the HCR 14 Disability Voting Task Force is going to be very instrumental in ensuring that people who have disabilities have proper voter access at the polling locations, as well as with our absentee ballot process. I will work with organizations like Disability Rights Louisiana. I have worked with both of our pro bono agencies, as well as developed a law firm with 10 offices across the state, one in each region, to support their customers, as well as my law firm's regular customers. We have developed clinics, legal clinics, as well as trained attorneys to work with people and to service customers in disadvantaged and marginalized communities, as well as people who have disabilities and low-income residents across Louisiana. So I'm going to implement that same process because it works. And I know it works because I'm doing it. And to ensure that people with disabilities have access, I will also expand voter access by encouraging voter participation, increasing voter outreach, streamlining the voter registration process, and again, combating voter suppression, which many of the things that we're talking about today are forms of voter suppression. You know, it used to be police with billy clubs and water hoses and things like that. But nowadays it is misinformation, disinformation, and discouragement when people reach the polls. So I will be implementing those measures immediately, because that's something we can do just by simply working with people in the community and people with organizations that already do the work. I believe you're muted.
The follow-up question is this,
Sure.
and this will be for Mr. Morrell. I find Louisiana is still in the 19th century. Why can't we have same-day voter registration? And I know that's a legislative function, but is there anything that you can do as a Secretary of State that you would do were you elected to address that problem?
Well, I've done it before and I would do it again, to join organizations that would go to the legislature and try and get the legislature to pass laws where they can have the same day voter registration. You can do it right now with that. They used to be able to do it at the DVD offices, but voting should be allowed to anyone, make it as accessible as possible. Because without that individual right to vote, we don't have a democracy. Because democracy starts at the lowest level, the right to vote. My first election, I won by 56 votes. And I tell people when I go to high schools to get kids to register to vote, how important it is to vote, that you may not think your vote counts. But I've had elections where there've been 2 votes to determine whether a person won or lose. Education is important. I try to get this, I did when I was the clerk. I'd have people to go to various high schools and educate the kids. If they're old enough right then to vote, we had voter registration cards, had them to fill it out, and we brought it to the registrar's office. But we made ourselves available and let all the counselors know that if ever they need someone to come and educate the kids, we had someone available. Ignorance is no excuse. And when you have someone who's pushing for voter registration and voting, the clerks and the Secretary of State is important.
Okay, Ms. Collins Greenup, same question, same day registration. When I was in California after Katrina, I was a polling commissioner, and a young lady came in with her mother, showed her a driver's license and registered to vote and was able to vote that day. I know that it's a legislative function, but what can you do to further the idea of same day voter registration?
Again, that goes back to the voter education piece, because while it sounds good, getting that implemented by the legislature, they're going to be influenced by their constituents. And in this state, that has been polled, and a lot of citizens aren't for same day voter registration because they have concerns about the security and people coming here from out of state yesterday wanting to come vote here and influence an election and not actually being a citizen. So we have to educate voters, establish a process that will not allow people to manipulate our voter registration system and our voting laws to circumvent that and come here and get their candidate of choice elected. That will disenfranchise voters who already live here without the proper protocols in place. I believe we're going to have to implement that and work with our legislature to ensure that the voters in this state are educated on that process, that we have the proper internal controls in place to ensure our elections are not being manipulated, and to support that type of legislation, you'll need a Secretary of State who can explain that process and show people how it actually works so they can have buy-in. I believe we can do that.
Now, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question, and then we'll kick it back. But there's a process here in Orleans Parish when you want to register to vote, as I understand it, I could be wrong, but that your application has to go to Baton Rouge, it has to be validated, then it comes back and it's like 30 or 40 days before you get your voter registration card. Is there anything that can be done to speed up that process?
Okay, so if you have a ID or a driver's license, you can literally go online, like I did with my sons each time they were old enough to register to vote. We went online on the Secretary of State's website, and we used that ID or that driver's license, and we registered to vote right then, and they were registered. So the only thing they were waiting on is that card to come in, but they were registered right then. So we do have that in place. Again, it's going to take a people-facing Secretary of State that works to get that information out, because we have a lot of information that's easy. It's available on the Secretary of State's website, but it's not being communicated to people. And as we said, the website is a mess. So people need to know it's there, and when you get to the website, you need to be able to go directly to that information and not have to fiddle around with it to get there. So we'll work on those things with our voter outreach division that's already in there. We'll work to expand that and to make it more user-friendly and more informative to our citizens across the state.
Okay, Mr. Morrell,
Yes.
while you can register to vote online, how do you, it does not, is it apparent then if you vote on, register to vote online, are you going to be told what your precinct is, where your polling place is? To Mr. Morrell.
Yes. When you register to vote online, they'll have some questions you have to answer. If you register online or in person 30 days before the primary election, you don't have to have your voter registration card. You can vote because
How do you know where to go to vote?
well, if you go and register in person, you fill out the form, someone at the registrar's office, they're gonna put all that information in there and tell you. They will tell you, we will try to get you a card before election day. But if not, they can always call the registrar of voters office, tell them where they live, they can tell them where to go. We have had in some occasions where a person registered to vote at one place, but then they moved and they tried to go vote at the other place. Well, our commissioners would ask them, well, where do you live? And then they ask, well, you're not showing you registered at this place, you registered at another place. But those are people who, for some reason, they registered to vote in time to vote an election, but they misunderstood where they needed to vote. I believe that if you have the information about where you live, you should be able to vote. However, that vote isn't counted until it's verified. Just like in a federal election, you can have someone who lives in Shreveport and vote in New Orleans, and they'll allow that because they have a form there that they can fill out. And that vote isn't counted until the Board of Executives, the Board of Election Executives review it, verify that you are registered voter in Shreveport, and you did vote in on time though, but that's only in federal elections. I would like to see something like that in local elections where a person who can't make it to the poll in time can vote somewhere else. But until it's verified, it's not counted. But they don't open it. They just verify that this person's name and they live at this location, then they can count the vote.
So Ms. Greenup did put in the chat box that yes, you will get your precinct once you register online. So let me go back to Ms. Greenup with the Collins Greenup with the next question.
Sure.
What is your position on Amendment 1? Why should we not just prohibit non-governmental funding of elections? Do you think that it makes sense to categorize contributions from foreign government and non-governmental sources together, or should they be treated differently? Mrs. Collins Greenup.
So currently, elections are not to be influenced by funds, and mainly people look at foreign sources of funding. They definitely should be categorized differently. However, the Secretary of State doesn't take a position on amendments. I will just say that I work to be nonpartisan and I will follow the laws that are in place. I will support anything that will help, I would say that will help secure our elections and protect every eligible Louisiana citizen's right to vote. But I will not get involved in that issue because the Secretary of State has to maintain a nonpartisan position on issues like that. Now, if it affected people's right to vote, or it was something that impacted, let's say, voter registration, voter outreach, or it was a form of voter suppression or voter fraud, those are all things that are under the purview of the Secretary of State's actual function. And those are things that we have to ensure that we are not violating, as well as the people who administer elections. So on that issue on Amendment 1, I am aware of it, but as a Secretary of State candidate, I'm going to act like I am the current Secretary of State, and I'm going to start doing my job now, which is to stay out of issues that are culturally influenced and not a part of the Secretary of State's job.
Okay, Ms. Morrell, same question.
I'm against foreign money coming into this state, this country, to try and influence the result of an election. It is the law that if a candidate receives money from a foreign government, if he knows about it, he can be prosecuted for it. But if he finds out about it, he's supposed to send that money back and make it known that this money came from a foreign government and he's not accepting it. The Secretary of State's job is not to determine that, but I wholeheartedly agree that no foreign money should be used to influence an election in this country. It's a way of infiltrating our government with this dark money.
So now I have, because I want to try to get on down the road, because we need to have our pillars and the people in the chat room questions answered, but I have a couple of rapid fire questions, yes or no, 1 minute maximum. I'll start with you, Ms. Morrell. There are multiple active legal challenges against the Louisiana Secretary of State's office that claim Black voters have been denied fair representation in Louisiana's district maps for Congress, the state legislature, and Supreme Court. Do you believe that there should be additional majority Black districts drawn in any or all of these maps? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Alabama has 25% of the voting population of Black. We have 31%. The Supreme Court just ruled that they are entitled to another. Louisiana also filed suit. And when it comes to Louisiana and the Supreme Court, we're going to get our second. When I was in the legislature, they had gerrymandering in the state. And I was chairman of the Black Caucus then, and we sued the legislature and we won. And they had to go back and we draw all the lines because they were wrong. I wholeheartedly believe that correct representation that should be done according to population is important, because you can have gerrymandering, is what they're doing right now. Cause one district be 95% Black in one representation. That's gerrymandering. I've supported it. I will continue to support it. And I hope the Supreme Court follows through with Louisiana like it did with Alabama.
Okay, Ms. Collins-Greenup, same question. Do you
Yes.
believe there should be additional majority Black districts drawn in any of the maps?
Yes.
I can leave with the next rapid fire question with you, Ms. Collins-Greenup. Is the training of local election officials adequate at this time? Yes or no?
No, it's
Okay.
not uniform. And I
Okay,
will
and-
work to do uniform training. I've already talked to the clerks of court to work on implementing uniform training for all, so they won't be trained differently. Everybody will be trained the same, and it'll be
Thank
uniform.
Thank you. Mr. Morrell, is the
Yes,
training of
right now-
local election officials adequate?
Yes, they are trained. The Secretary of State sends down the training material that's used by every clerk. So they're all trained with the same material. No clerk of court can implement its own method of training the commissioners. That's the Secretary of State's responsibility, and I like to keep it that way. And what we've had so far, I think, has been adequate, because before every election, The Secretary of State sends information to upgrade the commissioners if there's been any changes. But we have classes before every election, make sure that they're up to date.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Valerie and Lane because we have questions from the audience. So ladies, please.
Yes, I'm gonna turn it over to Lane. Lane is ready.
I don't know about that. I was not planning on this, but I'm going to go ahead since you just talked about recruiting and training of commissioners. And candidate Morel, you referred to that the call for new commissioners that was put out. I think was it last year? I think Secretary Morel, Mr. Morel. I think it was was it last year that it was put out?
We always put out information asking for new recruits to come in,
Okay,
but we haven't really had a shortage. We've had anywhere between 1,500 to 2,000 commissioners. Sometimes commissioners want to come and be active on election day, but we can only have so many.
right.
But the classes we give, or we get the direction from the Secretary of State.
Well, I wanted just to comment on the fact that I replied, I believe it was 3 separate times to the call for people who were interested in, we were directed to a form and had to fill out the form and submit the form, as I recall. There was a website was involved. I tried to qualify for, for the training, to take the training for commissioner 3 separate times, never heard a word back. I just want to raise that issue. I know there's nothing that the two of you or either of you can do about that, but I really want to raise that to you, that the process of actually communicating and collecting the information from people who are interested in taking the training and becoming part of the process, that really needs to be, at least in Orleans Parish, at least through I guess it would be the clerk of court.
Criminal clerk of court.
Yeah, that really needs to be looked at because I tried and tried and tried. And let me tell you, I'm pretty persistent and I could not get any response. I tried calling the numbers that were provided to see if I could, just talk to somebody about the fact that I had submitted my application and I couldn't get, and I was never able to contact a human being about that. I just wanted to raise that. That said, and I don't expect either one of you to have to answer for my problems, but I wanted
Yeah,
to
I definitely will. The clerk of court, when you apply to be election commissioner, that goes through whatever clerk of court is in that parish because they're the ones recruiting. And so I can only speak from my experience in the parish I worked in, administering elections, which was East Feliciana. When people applied to be commissioners, the clerk of court contacted them and they went through the training. Even if they weren't going to be commissioners, we still trained them. Because I mean, the training, it's just the information that they're being provided. So I remember when I first went down to be a commissioner, I went through the commissioner training. I wound up working at the clerk of court's office a month later. So this is something that a lot of people have expressed concern about, is wanting to be a commissioner and not being selected. Again, this is going to be a people-facing Secretary of State issue. You're going to have to communicate and work with the local clerk of courts to ensure that citizens are educated on the process, because it could be that that clerk of court just doesn't have that practice. And again, they are all different. They are trained differently because the clerk of court, even if they have that manual, they implement their own training. You can't control what each clerk of court does. There's no way to do that. So that's why it's going to take a cooperative effort and someone who's willing to work with all of the clerk of courts to get the buy-in that's necessary to do the uniform training, as well as to get that information out there on how the commissioner selection process works, and communicate better with citizens in the recruiting process to ensure that no one's left out, that people are aware that if they didn't get contacted, why? You know, those are simple
Exactly.
things, because
Exactly.
we're taxpaying citizens. So if you want to be election commissioner, you deserve the right to at least be considered. And if you're not, know why.
Yeah. Valerie?
Wait, can I answer?
Oh, yeah, go on, go on.
Yes, yes, Mr. Morrell.
I don't
Go
know
ahead.
I don't know about other parishes, but in Orleans Parish, we get someone who wants to be a commissioner. They can simply call in, give their name and telephone number. There's a process. You get their name and telephone number. You have to check to see whether or not that person is a registered voter before you even call them back. You have to make sure that they're old enough before they can be a commissioner. Now, we very seldom have problems with commissioners, recruiting commissioners. But when I was clerk of court, anyone called to be a clerk, a commissioner, we also bring them in. And I'll say again, no clerk of court trains commissioners the way they want to. That is sent down to them by the Secretary of State. If they violate what the Secretary of State sent them down to train their commissioners, they could be in trouble as an ethical violation, because they don't have the authority to train commissioners the way they want to. We get a packet before every election that the Secretary of State sends to every clerk and tell them this is the information you need to train your commissioners update. But I don't know of any clerk who trained their commissioners other than what's been given to them by the Secretary of State.
Just to
So they're
be
using the
clear,
same material, but they don't have to. It's just like a school teacher. There's 6 different learning styles that people have, and you can use whatever training method you would like to use to train those people with those different learning styles. You can choose to do your training just by simply using the manual, or you doing it via audio, just talking through the material. You can choose to use a PowerPoint to do it. What I'm proposing is working with all the clerks of court to ensure that we can implement a uniform training session where people are using not only the same written materials that the Secretary of State passes down, but that they are also considering people's learning styles when they are implementing this. And I can do that because I have courses in Masters of Education. So I'm aware that we need to ensure that we're making sure that everyone is learning and retaining that information on the same level.
Thank you, Miss Green, Miss Green.
Can I say
Thank you.
something?
Appreciate you. Yes, this will be the last time because we got to turn over
Okay.
the lane because we have some more questions. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you all respecting one another. Oh, we just love you both. Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Did you say I can comment?
Yes, yes, yes.
You know, I was a clerk for 16 years. And if I had violated my oath of office by not training the commissioners with information I got from the Secretary of State, I would be in serious trouble. No clerk trains their commissioners the way they want to train them. The Secretary of State tell them what material to use. There's no manual for a commissioner. There's a booklet that you get every time there's an election to bring you up to date. There's no manual that you can go and see, oh, I want to be a commissioner and I got to follow these rules. I follow the law every time. And I made sure that my people who teach the class follow the law, which says the Secretary of State gives you this material, and that's what you teach these commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Morrell. Okay, we're gonna turn over back to Lane. The next question.
there's a question from Jeff. Jeff, would you rather ask your question? I'm going to go ahead. Since there we go. There, Jeff. I think you're muted, Jeff. We can't hear you.
Jeff, we can't hear you.
I'm going to go ahead and ask the question since we can't hear Jeff. He says, have there been clerks of court that have created training or policies that have suppressed voters? Have there been? I guess that should go first to Mr. Morel.
I'm not aware of any. And if they did, they violate their oath of office and can be thrown out of office for doing that. But I'm not aware of any.
Ms. Collins Greenup?
I'm not aware of any either. But the Secretary of State's office, it can always be anything that interferes with an election or that violates voting rights can always be reported to the Secretary of State's office. They do have a hotline as well as an online place where you can report anything like that. But you know, whether or not they have received reports about that, I wouldn't know unless they published it. But that would be one resource where if you are interested in knowing that, that you can check to find out.
There's another question. When y'all answered or addressed Amendment 1, particularly Mr. Morel, you mentioned funding to support elections or involving elections, funding from foreign governments. But what about funding from US corporations?
There's nothing against the law from US corporations supporting candidates. If there's a limited amount of money that a corporation can donate, if it's in the law, they have to follow the law. If they go over that, the person who received the money, when they find out about it, has to return the money. Just like in this election, the maximum one person could contribute to a candidate is $5,000. If you get $5,001, you have to return that $1 back, and you have to notify the Ethics Commission what has happened, and you follow those processes. Foreign governments is something else. They'll try and sneak money in. They'll try and send it through someone else's name, but once it's found out, you're in trouble.
Ms. Collins Greenup?
Again, I'm going to follow my ethical duty, the same one that I will have as Secretary of State, to not try to influence political measures. I'm going to follow the law that's currently in place, and right now the law prohibits that. As far as to who those organizations should or shouldn't be, I'm not going to make any type of express any type of opinion on that, because again, my opinion would be considered as an influence. And as the Secretary of State, we have to remain nonpartisan. And there are some people who are of certain parties that believe that we should do that, and some people of certain parties that do not believe that. And as Secretary of State, in order to maintain a nonpartisan position, we will, I will be required not to express an opinion on that, because that will make voters think that I am partisan, and I'm not. Thank you.
Another question is, have there been any changes in polling locations in Orleans Parish for this election? And if there have been, how have those changes been publicized? Or in case something had to be changed, which sometimes happens at the last minute, how would that be publicized? And I'll ask the question first to Ms. Collins Greenup and then to Mr. Morel.
Okay, so first of all, if there's a change in a polling location, even though we've said the Secretary of State's website is a mess, it is listed on there. They do communicate it directly on the website. The Register of Voters, they also communicate that information. But again, I will ensure that it is properly communicated on the Secretary of State's website, as well as communicated on social media.
And Mr. Morel?
I don't think the Secretary of State's website is a complete mess. It can be improved, but not a complete mess. In Orleans Parish, if a polling location has to be moved for some reason, and we've had them move the same day of the election. For, say for instance, they don't have running water, electricity. It's one of those things that's mandated that operates before you can have, and we've had people to stand out there, and we've had the dredge people to move machines to another location and have someone out there let them know we couldn't open this place because the law wouldn't allow us, but we had to change the location. If we find out in enough time, we notify the registrar voter and also the council person who that polling place is located in, and tell them, look, there's a problem with this place. We don't think it's going to be ready. The council member have to make a recommendation where that polling place can be moved. We don't make that decision. The clerks doesn't, the Secretary of State doesn't. It's the council person in Orleans Parish says where that polling place is going to be. If they get it in time, if they know it in enough time, the registrar voter by law is supposed to send out a voter registration cards to everyone who voted at that precinct, at that polling location, that the new polling location has been moved. If they have enough time, but if not, we have a person standing out there to direct everyone who come there that had voted at that place before to go to the new place.
I wanted to ask another question. I'm sorry, let me just jump in. It's Cece again.
And I wanted to let you guys know that I did include the link on the Secretary of State's website where
Right.
you can find the polling location changes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we see those things, but let me just ask this question. It has to be asked. I know that in Georgia at one point, there was a big hurrah because of purges of the voting list. I think that Kemp purged something like 325,000 voters before the gubernatorial election. I understand that, and I was trying to get information from Audouin about the voting purges here in Louisiana, because I knew that they had one scheduled for last year. Then I heard there was a second one, but I could not get any answer from his office as to when those purges would occur, how people could check to see if they were purged. Nobody answered me. So I would like to ask, beginning with Ms. Collins Greenup, what are you going to do about the purges?
So first of all, I will not be purging unnecessarily. Louisiana currently has a lot of natural disasters, and as someone who has established a law firm that works with disaster survivors, as well as had experience working with disaster survivors during Katrina, we are well aware that sometimes people have moved away because they are getting their homes repaired. And sometimes it takes a long time to get that insurance money and get those repairs made or get assistance from FEMA. I will work to ensure that people who, that our voter rolls are cleaned up, but that is for people who are deceased, and the Secretary of State's office gets those notices as well as the register of voters. So that's nothing we have to be concerned with. But as far as the purging people who we believe have moved or the house isn't there, it could not be there because it's a storm took it away. We have to make sure that we are not purging people unnecessarily and that we are protecting every eligible Louisiana citizen's right to vote. So I will work to ensure that people who are not supposed to be on the rolls aren't, but people who we can't, I believe the right to vote includes the right not to vote. So I don't want to purge people because they don't like the candidates on the ballot this time and they don't want to vote. And we don't know when they may love the candidates that are on another year and they want to go vote. So that's not what I want to do. I want people to vote, and I want them to be registered and able to exercise their right to vote when they want to and they're ready. Thank you.
And the reason I'm going to ask Candidate Morrell, but the reason I brought it up, Candidate Morrell, is that I can remember back in the day, I had been living in the same place for maybe 10 years. I got a card from the Secretary of State's office and a postcard, and they wanted me to send something back. It was going to require me to have to go to the post office, do this, that, and the third. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Well, I got purged. And so I'm just saying, the whole idea of sending a postcard to a person to say, do you still live here? There must be a better system. But anyway, go ahead. Candidate Morel.
I got them
Well,
too.
I'm not aware of the Secretary of State sending any cards to anyone about purging. That responsibility is with the Registrar of Voters. The Secretary of State can request a Registrar of Voter to purge if that Secretary of State feel that this Registrar of Voter hasn't reviewed its voter update their voting polling list. He can do that, but he doesn't do it. It's the Registrar of Voter for each parish that sends out these notices. The Secretary of State doesn't do this. He can request that they take a full review of the polling list, but the Registrar of Voters is the one who sends out the cards.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Lane.
It's one small question that I raised earlier. Candidate Morel, you mentioned that you would look into what might be called, online or electronic voting measures like texting, I think you mentioned, or emailing. Are those within the authority of the Secretary of State, or would they have to be authorized by the legislature? And so what can you do to get those put into place?
That's an act of the legislature, but you can vote by fax right now. It's in the law, you can do it. And the Secretary of State doesn't say, I'm gonna do it. The legislature says, Secretary of State, this is the law. Now you can have voting by fax. And I've done it a couple of times for someone who couldn't make it to the polling place. And when it's done by fax, the person requesting it have to request it from a station place where the registrar emails the ballot to that place. A notary public has to be there to make sure that the person who requested it vote, because that notary public has to have that person sign an affidavit acknowledging that because their vote isn't in secret now because it's published, they can't see it. But someone did see it, and that's the notary public. But you can do it right now.
I actually once voted by fax, and when I couldn't get to the polls, and it was an unbelievably complicated and arcane process. So I appreciate that it's possible. I'm not sure that anybody who didn't have a bunch of either legal training or a bunch of lawyers around them, which I happened to have around me at the time. So I had a couple of notary publics, available to me. That's just incredible. But anyway, Candidate Collins Greenup, do you want to say anything about how you feel about electronic voting?
Again, as he stated, you can currently vote by fax. As far as to text voting and I think, what else did you say? Voting electronically?
Yeah, by email or by, even if it's by sending a PDF of a signed and notarized form, anything like that. Is that something that you've considered or that you would support?
I've definitely considered it and thought about it, but again, these would all be acts of the legislature.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think voting is a private act. No one should know how you voted in any election. That's why you have to have these mechanisms. The fax voting that I did for a couple of people, it wasn't difficult for me. Maybe those others didn't know how to do it, but it wasn't difficult. But anyway, you can get a voter to vote. I'm all for it, and I'd help.
Exactly. If the protocols are in place to administer it, we could do it, but we currently don't have the infrastructure to do that. but people can, the people who are counting the votes can see the way you vote when you vote absentee, because the envelope has your name on it. When we're in there opening them up, you open them up, you pass them down the road, you can see what's on the paper ballot. But the process for absentee, that's something where people have no other choice but to vote absentee. That's why a lot of people don't like to do it. But sometimes that's the only way that people are able to vote.
Can I respond?
Of course.
Can
go
I?
ahead.
Yeah, that's incorrect. With absentee ballots, no one knows how you voted. When you get your envelope into the Orleans Parish Executive Committee, the outside envelope has the person's name and social security number. The voting ballot is inside that. They separate that outside envelope, and the inside envelope doesn't have any identification marks on it at all. So you don't know how a person votes. Once that envelope, now they do keep the envelope to make a correct count. We have 1,500 envelopes and 1,500 ballots, but their ballot isn't open until election day, and they
Correct.
never match. So no one knows how you vote when you vote absentee.
So the envelope is opened by the commissioners, the persons who are opening the envelopes. We're all in one room. They open the envelope, they pass, they call out the name of the person,
No, they don't.
and they go down the roll and make sure that that person is in the precinct. They call out the precinct. All of that is marked off, and that paper ballot is passed down for verification, and then it's slid through the machine and read.
There's no
Thank you,
machine.
thank you, thank you. We see that you all respectfully disagree with one another. We thank you. We
I've done the
appreciate you all.
process.
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. So,
Thank you.
next, Elaine, the next question.
I think Sylvia has her hand raised, and I want to
Oh.
give her an opportunity.
Yes,
to ask
ma'am.
a question.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Thank you
It
so
is-
much.
Miss CC, it is 6:25. We shut down at 6:30. So we're gonna say Miss Sylvia. Hi, Miss Sylvia. She's gonna be the last
Hello.
one, and we're gonna turn it over to you for you to close us out. Thank you.
Hello,
Now
everyone.
end with a prayer. Thank you.
Amen. Hey, Miss Gwen. Hey.
Hey,
Cousin
how are you?
Arthur. How y'all doing? My question is, I didn't hear much. When it comes to the prisons, how do they go about with voting for them, like if they're in the halfway house? How do those steps go? I didn't hear much at all this evening about reaching out to those prisoners.
So are you referring to pretrial detainees, or are you referring to people who are out on probation or parole? Which ones?
Anyone.
So pretrial detainees are people who have been arrested. They're in jail, but they are pretrial, meaning they have been charged with a crime, but they haven't been convicted.
Amen.
There's currently a process in place where they can request absentee ballots and they can vote absentee. However, as Secretary of State, I will work with the local sheriffs and wardens to ensure that they are aware of this right, and that a process is in place that will ensure that they can request them and they can be collected and sent back to the register of voters timely.
Arthur?
You have had occasions, in fact, you have some right now, where a person's in jail, never been convicted of a crime. He's still eligible to vote, and he can request an absentee ballot. Some sheriffs has worked with the registrar of voters to allow them to come in with these request ballots. Some of them do. Most of them say you got to have it mailed in. I agree with that. They should be, as long as they're not convicted of a crime and their right to vote hasn't been taken away from them, they should be able to vote. And I would push for that.
Amen. Thank you all.
Looking
Okay.
good, Miss Sylvia.
Look
Thank you.
good. Okay, Miss CC, you gonna close us out, then I'm gonna end, we're gonna end with a prayer. If anyone have any announcement, please put your announcement in the chat and we will spread it out to our network. We thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you. Oh, and special
Hey,
thank you
guys.
to Miss CC.
I
Okay,
thought we were
Miss
gonna let,
Betty?
I thought we were gonna let them say something closing out.
Okay,
we
well, I
should.
apologize, Betty. Betty, I'm gonna get you off the camera. You could have texted me. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I am so sorry, guys. So we're gonna let the ladies go first, right, Mr. Murray? Thank you. We're gonna let Miss Brenner go
Yes,
first.
Ms. Valor.
Thank you for welcoming me here tonight, and once again, actually, because
Yeah.
I've run before, and I'm proud to be back again. Louisiana still needs a Secretary of State, and I believe I'm the candidate for it. I believe that our right to choose what's best for our future, our family, our communities, and our state is what truly makes Louisiana great. And I just want to remind you guys, my platform hasn't changed. I'm running for Secretary of State to strengthen Louisiana's businesses, secure Louisiana's elections, and protect every eligible Louisiana citizen's right to vote. And I'm going to use my experience as an attorney, an accountant, and a small business owner to ensure that we get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Morrell.
Thank you. I want to thank you again. I've been before and attended a lot of your meetings, and you're very good. I plan, when I'm elected, to open 2 offices, one in Northwest Louisiana and one in Southeastern Louisiana, to make the Secretary of State more visible to people who want to come in and get information. Machines, the voting machines are so important. The voting machines we have now are almost 30 years old, but they're so far the best I've ever seen, because to hack the result of an election in Louisiana, you have to go to every voting machine because each one of them is independent. And there are 3 double checks to make sure that the count is correct. We are the only state that can get a result of the election as much as 3 hours after the election closed. I've been held elections when that's happened because of our system. I'd like to know if there are machines out there are as good or better. They're old, but they're very, very effective. People right now want to have Louisiana have paper ballots. That's where you have corruption. You have the little tags hanging and you have, is this the person's signature and so forth. But what we have right now is very good. And the last thing I'd like to do is send delegates where they have business conventions to see if we can recruit some of those businesses to come to Louisiana, tell them what's available and how the Secretary of State could help them get their business moving along. This is so important. People don't understand. If what happened in Georgia with Trump and the Secretary of State, if that Secretary of State had agreed with Trump and said, I'm not going to certify these votes, we don't know where we would be. So we need a Secretary of State that's going to make the integrity of the count, make sure. And every election I've had, every one of them been on time, every time, and they've never been contested. And that's what I plan to do when I become the state Secretary of State.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Morrell. We thank both our candidates for coming on tonight. It's been very spicy and Cajun, and that's a good thing. That's good. That means that we know that you all gonna fight for the right of the people, and that's a good thing for both our candidates. Next, do we have any more candidates on this forum tonight who would like to introduce themselves and the positions that they're running? Do we have any more candidates? 1, 2, 3. Okay, no more candidates. Do we have any announcements? Okay, Ms. Lane.
I put on the chat the 3 really important points. The first one is most important. The final date for online registration to vote in the October election is this coming Saturday. I put the website for online registration in the chat. It's on the Secretary of State's website. If you go on the website and you just put in voter registration, that should take you there. But the link is in the chat. The second point announcement is that, and which was also posted by, I believe, by candidate Collins Greenup, is that the Louisiana polling place changes are listed on the Secretary of State's website. And I put the link on there, and I think candidate Collins Greenup also put the link in. It's very important, so you don't get screwed up at the last minute. Check ahead of time to see if the website, the polling place that you're used to, it may have been moved. And it may be moved up to the very day, as candidate Morell pointed out, it may be moved up to the very day of the election. So you got to check before you go vote. The third point is that there is election protection training available. The next availability is going to be done at the VOTE headquarters, VOTE, Voices of the Experienced headquarters, on Wednesday, September 20th. That's day after tomorrow, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at VOTE headquarters. That's at 4930 Washington Avenue. It's a real good training. There's also going to be a number of other online election protection trainings. And you can find out more about that at the VOTE website. That's it for me.
All right, thank you. Linda, put that down. Linda, put that down. Next, we are, next, early voting is also very important. Don't wait till the last minute. Early voting is very important. And I want to say the date is September 30th. September 30th is early voting. You have a whole week. So get your voting in.
Valerie's screen froze. Well, we want to thank the candidates, Ms. Gwen Collins Greenup, Arthur A. Morell, for being with us. It was very informative. And I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has as well. There are still probably some comments in the chat box, should anyone want to look at that, because of an important information there as well. So Valerie is not going to be unfrozen. Who's going to lead us out with the prayer?
Jeff, would you be willing to lead us out with a prayer? Oh, we still can't hear you, Jeff. I don't know what's going on.
Gotta unmute, huh?
No, he's not showing up as muted.
I could lead us out in prayer.
Oh, Sylvia,
Oh, why don't
thank you.
Everyone, please bow your head. Father God, we just say thank you. Thank you for the privilege and the opportunity to be on this call this evening, to learn more, to be educated by experts in this government system, Lord Jesus. All we ask is that you watch over them, you protect them, and you give them strength in their decision making. They are both learners who are willing to teach us, Lord Jesus, and we are willing to learn. So, Lord Jesus, we shall not be left behind, because we are eager to do what's right. We are the righteous, the chosen of yours, Father God, and we are here to work with each other because we need each other, Father God. So I ask for your blessings to come over each and every one of us, Father, and I ask you to protect those who wasn't able to be on this call as well, that they get involved some kind of way to make a difference. We can only make a difference by getting out there and vote, Lord Jesus. So the knowledge that was shared this evening, we just say thank you, Father God. Thank you for blessing us. Thank you for keeping us. And it's in Jesus' mighty name that we have prayed. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Good
God
night,
bless
y'all. Be safe.
everybody. Oh, you're back, huh?
Yeah.
Night.
God, I always have a ram in the bush.
Love y'all. Oh, love y'all. Love you, Arthur. Love you, Gwen.
Love you too.